Strategy group, can I have your attention there, please? Make sure our phones are on stun. Just that's a great reminder for me as well. Good. Okay. Minutes. Everybody happy for me to sign them as an accurate record? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Apologies, please. I've had none personally. I know we have two of our colleagues that need to leave at about 1900, about 7 p.m.
Yes.
Is that okay, sir? Thank you. Anyone else?
Councillor Miller and Councillor Loman.
Lovely, thank you. And apart from that, we're all here, yes? Good, thank you. Declarations of members' interest, please. Obviously, you know you have a responsibility to declare interests that you may have, disclosable interests. Obviously, if there's anything comes up and you are reminded that you should have declared them, please do so at the time when we will deal with that. Thank you. And first of all, we move straight into agenda item 4, which is accessing communications use BT payphones. And that's Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Upon reading the report, you will see that Section 4 sets out the issues about delegated decisions of officers. The delegated authority to agree to the removal of these units, in this case 9 of the original proposed 19, which have already been removed, we are recommending that members resolve to object to BT removing the remaining 10. There is no delegated authority for officers to do this on behalf of the council, and therefore the report has come to strategy this evening. In order to formulate the council's response, our first notification was produced, which set out contextual information for each box affected with a suggested response. This was sent to all town, parish councils and meetings where parishes covered the boxes. The comments received were taken into account in preparing a final draft notification, which is attached at Appendix A. If this response is agreed to, it will be sent to the Secretary of State and British Telecom as the Council's formal response to BT's consultation. BT has the right to appeal against the decision of the Council, but as yet have not chosen to exercise their rights. The suggested response to BT has been developed having regard to the guidance from Ofcom and the following. 1. Responses from parish councils, including if they wish to adopt the box. 2. Responses from residents. 3. Any information received about poor signals from mobile phones in that particular locality. 4. Any views that the phone could serve a useful purpose in emergency, example being would be alongside the canal network, etc. And 5, taking into account the levels of usage. For example, if a phone is used more than, say, 50 times a year, then it could have some form of social purpose. BT has established a system where it provides parish councils with the option of adopting their telephone box for £1. This only applies to the traditional red K6 telephone boxes. By adopting their box, the parish council can retain the telephone box itself, often highly valued heritage asset, often listed. But the telephone equipment itself will be the telephone equipment itself will be removed from the box. Various ideas for the future of the boxes have been put forward over recent years, including information centres and useful defibrillators. Therefore, I ask that this resolved item, I therefore ask to resolve that the suggested response to BT for the telephone boxes set out in Appendix A be agreed here this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Hills, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I support this. I go back about 5 years ago when it actually came under my portfolio. We had the same issues with BT, and going back about a couple of months ago now, I also did a radio interview, and it was very interesting listening to the public. And if people or the parishes purchase these boxes, they can be used for certain things. Some of them got flowers in, some have got refrigerators in. There was even one where it was near a bus stop, which was used quite a lot by the elderly, and they put a chair in there. So there's various uses for it, and I think we've identified how it should proceed, so I fully support this.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Chairman. I just say from what Councillor Hilton said, in my ward in Malton, we've had one which has been a very successful book exchange.
Yeah.
And that's something that we definitely wanted. It was the conservation area. We wanted it to, the actual box itself to retain as a heritage asset, as Councillor Howard's mentioned about heritage assets. So I think it's a good opportunity for parishes to take it on if BT does decide to take them away.
Yeah. Anyone else? I think I agree. It's a bit like the black taxi, the Bobby's hat, the red. It's one of those iconic things that we associate with the UK, and it's good. Just one thing on your appendix A, the schedule of responses. On the first one, it talks about replace the box with a traditional box. Is that the traditional K6?
Yes.
Is that what we mean?
Yes, Chair. What they've got is a more modern telephone box, and that would like.
They want K6. Yeah, just the fact that they use red K6, but then they use traditional. It's good. Okay. So if for no further ado, then those of you that agreed to the resolution, if you like to so indicate.
Agreed.
Anyone opposed to it? And any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Item 2. Sorry. Item 5. Community and culture, leisure and issues. That's the funding for community centre grants, etc. Is that
Thanks, Chair. Actually, this is all about 106 funding for the voluntary sector and for community grants. Basically, the Section 106 agreement of 2008 shows there is £21,245, which is uncommitted. And as stated in the introduction, the voluntary sector is regarded as a very relevant category. The sector itself has raised concerns, and there is an increasing demand regarding funding. It is proposed to transfer the remaining £21,245 to the capital grant budget, with the use of these funds restricted to the voluntary sector. Finally, I'm not going to say a lot, but I refer you to item 6 of the report, the conclusions, which states the Council is a clear supporter of the voluntary and community sector, so utilising this money will help meet the demand for capital grant funding within Daventry and facilitate wider community benefit. This, I believe, is something we should all support, and would ask you to approve the recommendations before you, and by doing so, give the support to the voluntary sector and the community itself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Chair, I'm happy to second this. Thank you. Particularly, it's good to see the money being used, and particularly good for it to be used for the voluntary sector in the town. And as one of the board members here this evening, I'd like to give that my full support. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hills, can you give me an example of the sort of cause it would be used for, those monies would be used for?
Well, yes. Anything that's applicable and meets criteria under community grants.
Right.
And this could be a village hall, this could be something to do with sport, anything like that, things for general use within the community.
Right, but it talks about here being restricted to voluntary sector, so
yes.
it wouldn't be a statutory
It could be the
organisation.
voluntary sector itself asking for grants for a village hall, or it could be the voluntary sector who are organising an event or sport or anything like that. So it covers quite a wide area.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Chairman,
Yeah,
I understand that DACT are not very happy about their rents and
No,
service charges on this lease.
Different report.
Is that the next one?
No, it's a different report.
No, right.
Okay. If then you're happy to recommend it, those of you, please show by green.
Yes.
Any against? And any abstentions? Okay, it's done, thank you. And again, this also, this is the Voluntary and Community Sector Commissioning now. I think this is the one that we talk about that. And that's over to you again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, voluntary and community sector commissioning, and before we get to the recommendations, there are a couple of corrections that I would like to make. Firstly, on page 26, third paragraph, instead of if the chief executive is minded, this should read if the council is minded. And on page 29, under conclusions, the last sentence should read, the strategy group is urged to approve the recommendations. So if you could amend that accordingly. Now to the actual recommendations, there are 3 in all. Number 1, that the voluntary and community sector services are commissioned from April 2021 for 2 years at £150,000 per year. Number 2, that the minor amendments to the policy statement commissioning funding for voluntary and community organisations 2019 are approved. And finally, number 3, the commissioning budget is increased from the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2023 to take into account the additional DAC grant of £9,048 per year. The current round of commissioning ends on the 31st of March 2021. It's worth noting this coincides with the unitary commencing on the 1st of April. I'd like to make a point. If we do nothing, the unitary could commence to charge from that date. They could even say, no, this is something we could not support. There is a lot of uncertainty regarding the future at the moment, regarding the voluntary sector, etc. And we have to remember that the Abbey building is classed as a commercial building. What we are trying to do is to buy time and give some continuity to both voluntary and the community sector by looking to prioritise the service areas for a further 2 years from the vesting day of the 1st of April 2021. It's worth noting that at the moment South Northants are non-committal. Northampton Borough has already extended for a further 2 years from 2021. And I'm pleased to say we are adopting the same approach, which I genuinely believe is the right decision. I now want to refer to DACT. I have supported DACT over many years, and I know they are highly regarded by this council. I've used them, I know them, and I think they are a very, very good organisation. So I've given a lot of thought to this, and after much discussion with senior management and much consideration, I believe that what we are proposing is the best course for them. Firstly, it gives them continuity right through to 2023, provides an opportunity to make plans for unitary, which will probably want to review the situation in 2023. And we are backing this up and are fully committed to provide additional grant funding of £9,048, with them paying £1,000 per annum more. This isn't utopia, but but we are looking to extend by another 2 years and thereby giving stability and support. Not for just now, but up to 2023. And that is why I believe this is right, and I ask for your support to enable us to do this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Obviously, we are aware of the lobbying that's gone on, so is there anyone that wants to discuss that?
Yes, I've in mind that the new Reach for Health building, that we're going to lease that to Reach for Health at a concessionary rent. And I thought that the figure was something like 80% of rental value. And I just wonder why this one is 66%. As compared with the other, there ought to be some degree of consistency. I agree that Reach for Health, that ought to pay the service charge in full. That's a given, I think. But the rent, 66%, I thought was quite generous.
Not yet.
Chairman, for clarity, what the proposal is, and obviously as officers we're dealing with the rental review within the policy and constitutional parameters you've given us, is the proposal is that DACT pays full market rent from the start of the new lease. It's only on a 66% rent now because we did a commercial deal when we wanted to move within the building.
Right.
Justified on commercial terms rather than policy terms. That concession period will run its course, and therefore the new lease is up. And as the report explains, that means that faces a cash increase of about £10,000 a year, about £9,000 a year more than it would have otherwise if the things had carried on as they were. So in discussion with that, with Chief Exec and others, proposal is, coming through Maria's team, that a special grant is given to DAC to help them make the transition. So for the 3 years matching the lease, they received a grant of £50,000. So it just makes it clear where the public support is coming from and how much it is, makes it open and transparent, and allows informed decisions to be taken in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
I just, why, how do we justify going to full commercial rent? What is the rationale behind that? What motivates us to do that, rather than keeping a concession there?
Chairman, the Council's Constitution, which is actually quoted on page 27, requires us to seek the best financial value in all property disposal, lettings and disposal, unless there is another policy direction. In this case, there isn't. Okay. Policy
Which is why Reach for Health is different, because we are building a purpose-built building, so it's not a commercial.
It is an emotive subject, and it always is, and I can understand DAC's concern with regard to the increase. But what is pleasing is the fact that the council are offering a grant over the same period of time. And to be fair, I will come to you. And to be fair, I'll come to you too. And to be fair, when by the time this finishes, it will be a unitary issue anyway. So we will have little or no influence. So there does sound to be some sort of mitigation to dealing with that. I just wondered, presumably they are aware of, because they talked about it in the letter about it going to the board, they are aware of it. Are they, they're not expressing that they can't afford that extra £1,000? I've seen them. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. We were told by the officer that the grant would help DACT make a transition. I may not have be quoting precisely, but that was the implication. I would be grateful if somebody could let us know a transition to what? Given the difficulties that voluntary organisations have in raising money, I mean, this is quite a big extra sum that DACT is going to need to find when this arrangement comes to an end. My second question is the lease that DAC has at the moment, or the normal lease that would be issued in the Abbey Centre. Is there a standard length of lease that is used? Because it strikes me that while we cannot give DAC any protection beyond the length of this council through grants, A long lease at the Abbey Centre, of course it can be rescinded, but much more difficult to do. It just strikes me that that would have been a route that would have made an awful lot more sense. And it might not fit with commercial criteria to say that you are going to give a lease at a preferential rate to a voluntary organisation using the Abbey Centre. But remember, this council built the Abbey Centre to provide a home for voluntary organisations. And if we are now creating it as a building that voluntary organisations cannot afford to operate from, that is a complete the reason why we built the place.
I think they're saying they can't afford it, and they're themselves going to say they can't afford it. But with regard to the other points, do you want to respond to those?
Chairman, excuse me. The report here, I'm conscious I'm referring to Maria's report quite extensively here, refers to a best value review that was carried out a long time ago, I think back in where the policy for the operation of the Abbey was changed. Council Region 5 White, it was originally built certainly as a largest community building, but the council's policy has not been that for many years, and therefore we're seeking to apply council's policies as they currently exist. Council is free to make new policy if it so wishes, but any policy that is made, of course, has to be defensive as rational and reasonable in the circumstances.
Okay, Councillor Guilford.
First of all, I'd like to support the additional grant for DACT, because obviously in my day job I know of many people across the whole district that utilise the DACT service and could possibly not survive without it. I just want some clarifications on the 1 and 2 recommendation. So number 2, the minor amendments to the policy statement. What are the minor amendments? So you can have that. And then number 1, that the voluntary and community sexual services are commissioned from April 2021 for 2 years. Are we saying that there'll be a whole new grant process application, or are we approving the 150 that are granted at this point in time going forward for those 2 years? It would be useful to know what the individual funds are.
Okay, Maria.
So taking them in order, the policy statement, the minor changes are just changing the date. So the current policy statement we currently commission up until the end of March 2021. So we're just making that, so it's quite clear. This policy statement about commissioning is we're going to extend the commissioning to 2023 instead. So it's just to really make, this is what's approved, to make sure we can do that. The community voluntary sector commissioning is about saying we have 150k. We go through a process and identify the kinds of services we wish to be commissioned along the criteria that's been used before. If you remember, we added to that process a year or so ago. Into that, for some years we just commissioned community transport and advice services for citizens advice group. It's slightly wider now, but we'll go through a due process and we'll do that this year so that we are commissioning from 2021 to 2023. So that'll be done in advance like we've done it before, but instead of doing a 3-year commissioning, we'll do a 2-year commissioning to make sure there isn't a gap at the end of 2021 financial year.
So all those currently in receipt of a grant will go through the application process?
Potentially. I mean, we will have to go through that exercise, but I think it's a fair assumption that if they came out as the top 4 or 5 service types that have the biggest impact because of the nature of the district, then the chances are it will be commissioning along very similar lines, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Randall.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is this going to be the same for all the voluntary groups within the Abbey? Are they all going to have their rent increased to the same percentage? And if so, what if they don't, if there's not enough grant for them all to go around, does that mean they'll just move out and we might just lose that organisation altogether?
I think there were two separate things going on
Yeah, go on.
from what I'm showing, because there are a number of community voluntary organisations who rent commercial space at the Abbey and we don't provide them with any grants. Time to Talk would be an example. It's for the policy reasons that have already been discussed. This council's got a community voluntary sector grant programme of various types, and completely separately, the commercial discussions at the Abbey are dealt with by the business team. That is so that any community voluntary support we provide is very transparent and through a direct route and not through like an indirect backdoor funding route. So there is at least one community voluntary organisation at the Abbey that doesn't get any grant funding on a regular basis through DDC. We happen to commission DACT and CAB at the Abbey, but we also commission other community voluntary organisations that don't happen to rent space from Daventry District Council.
And with regard to, I suppose it can be described as an increase with regard to, from the DACT's point of view, but from our point of view, it's just a commercial rent. It's just actually what people get charged. And for me, it will always be about the affordability. Remember, these monies are coming into us to help us provide services for other vulnerable and needy people and to provide functions and services of the council. So that money is desperately needed. So although I would agree from perspective it is an increase from DAC, but for us it's just that commercial rent to bring funds in to help us provide services. Councillor Morgan, and then I'll come to Councillor Adam then. Yes.
Thank you. I think Councillor Randall also had a voluntary of Councillor Randall was first.
Sorry, did you want to have a supplementary?
No, I'm just digesting all that now.
Oh, it might have confused me as well, but Councillor.
In that case, Chair, in the meantime, I think, I'm not sure if you took a second for that yet, but I'm happy to second it. And I think the point you make there is essentially some of this is simply money recycling, actually. But I think for me, what strikes me is adding that continuity and a level of security. I think it's perfectly logical, particularly now that some of the questions have been answered. So I'm, again, very happy to second this.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any great problems with the recommendations, but I would just like a clarification of this. A clear justification and explanation for the £825 within the £1,000 that we're asking that for. But then we're then asking for what seems to be a nominal amount of £175 towards service charges. The question that's brewed to my mind is, if we're reducing it all the way down to £1,000, why not go the whole hog and just reduce it down to nil? We're already giving a grant of £9,048 a year. What's the thought process behind asking for that number or something?
Who would like to answer that?
Well, through you, Chairman, we actually don't provide a grant currently. We commission them to provide a service, and I think that's 20,000. But I'll have to double check those figures. So we commissioned DAC to provide a service this year, and that goes on until 2021. So that's our starting point. Transparent grant through the front door. In the meantime, the lease issue has come up, and we've recognised that that's going to present a problem, which is why we're recommending. We've kind of collaborated on this to recommend adding to the grant in recognition of the fact that the change of the lease arrangements will be quite significant, but let's do it, overtly through the normal grant route. So we're adding grant to the existing commissioning. If members have an issue with what's recommended in terms of the £1,000 difference, that's a matter for members.
Sorry. If I might change, just briefly to explain the logic. Essentially, if you simply ran with a 66% increase, £1,000 or thereabouts is what you end up with. And therefore, I think there's some argument for saying DACT should, at the very least, plan for that. And as a mature BCS organisation, it's reasonable for them to take at least that part of the increase, which they should have budgeted for and planned for, whereas the larger increase, perhaps one can argue they wouldn't have appreciated was coming.
If I may, Chairman, is that where the concept of transition help comes in then?
To be fair, I can actually understand that it's about people paying something. It's about, and remember that £1,000 is coming into the coffers of the council to help provide services. Councillor Ritchie, and then we'll call this one to an end.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be interested to know whether the grants that have been given in the case of CUB being proposed in the case of DACT, if these are actually tied to these organisations continuing to rent space at the Abbey Centre. Is there a possibility that if we are able to give this nice grant to DACT, DACT might find a much cheaper place that could move to tomorrow? And this still is the thing. What I'm trying to establish, if you can, is the relationship that we have. What we want, let me put it this way, what is it we want from the Abbey Centre? If we say that the Abbey Centre merely charges commercial rent, it strikes me that the building then is no longer in any way special. It is just like any other office block. Okay, it has got the library in it. Was there any discussion that took place with the County Council at the time that the library is switched to the Abbey Centre that set out a sort of concept for the Abbey Centre, that the Abbey Centre was, a library that was a type of community hub and everything else? Or are we just making assumptions here? I just feel that if you have decided that you simply charge commercial rent to whoever will pay for it at the Abbey Centre, I think it would be helpful if next week, if the monitoring officer decides in the middle of a general election that you can actually do this, you put out a press release and say that DDC no longer regards the Abbey Centre having anything to do with the voluntary sector.
Sorry, do you want to answer? Yeah, sorry.
Can I just clarify this, because I think what Councillor Ritchie said was true up to a point, because what happened is this council changed its policy. And so this idea, this concept that building still remains for voluntary sector use and just voluntary sector use, that hasn't been our policy for quite a number of years now. Because of that best value review, recommendation to council changed its policy entirely. So whilst there may be still some thoughts in members' minds that it is for the voluntary sector, actually we changed the policy of this council quite dramatically. And more than 10 years ago, I'd say this. There's not been a pure voluntary sector building, to my knowledge, for more than 10 years.
Okay, I think we've aired this. Is there anything, officers, you want to respond to any factual things that you feel necessary?
I'm conscious, Chairman, that one question probably was answered, which is are there other charitable groups on lower rents in the building? My understanding is all the tenants, bar the library, which obviously is a special case, and that are already on the full market rents.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll bring it to a vote then. So those of you who agree to the recommendations, please indicate. Any objections to that? And any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Hills are still with you, I think, now. This is the Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Policy.
Yeah, I don't propose to say too much on this, Chair. Basically, the recommendation before you is that the council adopts the draft countrywide domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy for 2019 to 2022. This is a major concern within the county, and needless to say, the country as well. This is a multi-agency approach across all Northamptonshire and confirms the council's zero tolerance for violent, threatening or abusing behaviour. I don't intend to say any more on this report. The reports are there before you, and I ask for your agreement on this.
Thank you. Certainly with regard to this, as a member of the Police and Crime Panel, as Vice Chair, that we actually raised this and pushed this because prior to this strategy coming out, that Northamptonshire had no domestic violence policy, no joined-up policy with all the statutory and voluntary agencies on dealing with one of the biggest curses of society is when partners abuse other partners, and so I am really glad that this comes through pressure from people actually that understand that I think it's 2.1 murders a week occur as a result of domestic violence, so we need to do something about it. So first of all, Councillor Buchanan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm fully supportive of this. I think it's really important, as you've just indicated, that everybody knows what the approach and policy is for this. It's particularly important for elected members here who may, if they're unfortunate enough to have a case brought to their attention in their own patch, they need to know what is the county strategy and what resources and support might be available elsewhere. So I'm fully supportive that we should be seen to adopt this so that we all know where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Chairman. Also, what's great about this is it actually puts it down to a lead coordinator. You know, there are many times that we have sloping shoulders and we say, actually, well, it's not ours, it's their responsibility. Quite clearly, in the action plan, in the objectives, it clearly states who's the lead organisation and who is responsible for working together, and I think it's great. Sorry, I lost count of who put their hands up. Was it someone from the... Sorry, Councillor Randall.
Yeah, no, I did. No, I welcome it, and like you say, it's really good to see that you've now got organisations that are, you know, grouped together. I mean, I've come across many that have been involved in domestic violence, and it's often, you know, I produce 3 different reports, and it's often like 25 times they might have been raped before they even get to that point that they've reported it. And when I've spoken to people that haven't reported, and I've asked why they haven't reported, and it's generally because they fear for their lives of themselves or their children. It's the backlash because they report it and then he'll come back and attack them all again. And so, you know, it's a very, well, it's just awful, but I'm pleased that, you know, as much is being done, you know, it's a good step forward.
It is. I think it's highly inappropriate that we close a refuge in the north of the county and when we're crying out for places in the south, prior to this there was no joined up strategy as to what assets do we need in what place to try and keep people safe that suffer from this crime. Sorry, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Although, you know, we live in one of the nicer bits of Northamptonshire, but we have within our district, we have a number of the black spots for domestic abuse. I'm just slightly concerned that all the support providers for which contact details are given all seem to be based in Northampton. Are there any assurances that services will be equally available in Daventry and elsewhere?
I think that it is a county strategy. My issue is about has it been unitary proofed with regard to the split that occurs there. And I spoke to the Commissioner about that to ensure that when we go to unitaries, this is a joined up approach for dealing with people in any part of the county and these individuals. But with regard to the unitary proofing, I think that's an important bit because in 18, 19 months' time, we'll be 2 counties, but we still need a strategy that's going to protect our citizens. So I'm confident for the meanwhile, but the long term, we still need to make sure that it's in place when we go to unitary. Councillor Oswald.
Yeah, it was my charity, Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Charity, last year as council chairman. Do we still have a women's refuge in Daventry? Because I remember opening one when I was chairman of housing. That seems a long while ago for that position. I remember opening one in Warwick Street in Daventry. Does it still exist?
I'm not sure.
I can't answer the question. I don't think so. I could be wrong.
Can somebody take that away and just to confirm it for Councillor Osborne, thank you, by email? Thank you. Will you do that, mate? Okay, that'll be taken away more. Okay, sorry, Councillor Hills.
Yeah, I'd just like to sum up on this. I think it was badly needed. I think it's a good piece of work. We've now got a structure and something that all agencies are taking part. So I think everybody should support this. Let's get it on the move.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if we take it to a vote now, those of you who are happy to agree the recommendations, please anyone against? And then any abstentions? Okay, that's unanimous again, thank you. And still with you, sir, the Malton Leisure Centre. Councillor Hills.
Thank you once again, Chair. Firstly, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there are There are pink papers attached to this report, and should there be any need to discuss these, then if there are members of the public attending, they must be approved.
Councillor, can I just intervene there? That was a good point. You're doing the job for me. Well done, sir. If we do stray into any of those areas, we have an adjudicator here that will intervene, Simon. So hopefully we won't stray into those. So carry on. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, basically, this is to seek the approval of the business plan for the new leisure centre at Moulton, and details the purchase of the Chris Moody Centre. As you are all aware, this project has been on the council's radar over a very long period, and is something that we as a council have been committed to do. There are 7 recommendations in front of you, and the main points are as follows: that the business plan is approved, the capital budget is reduced to 8,500,000, and that a SLM be appointed to run both centres. And it's worth noting that SLM were recently given a prestigious award for the running of the leisure centre. That the capital programme be amended to include recurring capital investment of 30,000 per annum over the period 22 to 23, 23, 24 and 24, 25. I would also refer you to item 4.1, purchase of the Chris Moody Centre. That this will be and is subject to planning permission for the use as a public leisure centre, with a target of 2020. 4.2, the business plan is appended and it contains sensitive commercial information, so therefore it's in summary form. Engagement with current users has and is currently underway. 4.3 outlines the programme and gives details of discussions with Northampton Swimming Club. One thing we need to do is strike a balance, particularly regarding usage, and whether using the grant system is possible. It's very well worth noting that this project fulfils the Council's sports facility investment strategy and our aim of increasing physical activity and tackling obesity, and that the Council will continue to look after the centre after purchase. This is also very much us as a Council leaving a worthwhile legacy and creating certainty for all our users. So I would welcome your support on something that I believe really does leave a legacy for the people in Moulton and that area.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure members want to speak on this, particularly ward members, but I wanted to point out one very minor item on number 2. When you read it, it says that the capital budget for the project be reduced to blah blah blah, and then it says thus released transferred. Obviously, because it's a money issue, I wanted to make it clear that that should be thus. It should read thus released and transferred. It's very subtle, but it makes the scanning of the recommendation more sensible. But while I've got the floor, I also wanted to say that this obviously makes money for us, and it's positive and provides a leisure facility, and I support it.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've said before here that I'm fully supportive of this move. At the moment, the Chris Moody Centre is the only place you can get hydrotherapy unless you're a dog or a horse in Northamptonshire. And so I look forward to this facility being maintained in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, just one thing, Chairman. A member of this council, I won't say who, phoned me up today and said, "Are you going to strategy goods tonight?" And I replied, "Yes." How has the council found 8 million to spend on this project? Well, clearly they haven't read their papers and don't know what's been happening for the last few months. But not only that, there was another thing. I've had 3 people in Long Butley, and I don't very often get that. 2 actually knocked my door, and the other one in passing conversation say to me that on similar sort of lines, and they don't understand where the 8 million is coming from and how it's being paid back. I wonder if there's any way it could be made clearer in the public, in simple terms for people to understand, because there are people out there that believe we're suddenly spending all that money, and clearly we're not spending all that money. Okay?
Simon, do you want to respond?
Chairman, I'll try and be as simple and clear as I can. The money comes from developer contributions.
Yes, I know where it comes from, but the people out there don't.
The council is full funding it from its reserves and being paid back over a few years.
I take it, do we feel that maybe the communication quite clear in what we've sent out, or could that be made clearer? I wondered if you could take a look at that. We'll take a look at that, and I think to making sure that is idiot-proof, so if I understand it, then everybody else should understand it. So if I can understand it, yeah, if you could take a look at it. Thank you. Councillor Cribbin, please.
Thank you. As local ward member for Malton, I'm very grateful for this council for what it's done and what it's doing. I'd like to, Phil's already seconded it. Can I second the proposal? It's something that's needed over the side of the district. It's something that obviously people from that area have to travel away to Daventry for their leisure facilities. And bearing in mind we've got this massive SUE that's coming online over the next 15, 20 years or whatever, there's going to be a definite need for this over in that part of the village. It's not just for Malton people, it's for everybody in the eastern side of the district. So I think councillors need to appreciate that it's not just a Malton thing. Everybody will benefit from it. And it's something that we've been pushing for. I think as local members of myself and the council for quite a while. We did have a leisure centre of sorts within the secondary school, but that's sadly fallen by the way over the course of the last few years. So this could be an excellent facility for not just for Malton people, but for everybody in the Eastern Development side.
Thank you, Councillor Cribbin. Councillor James, did you?
Yes, just briefly, fully support this project because it's mutually beneficial to Malton College and Daventry District Council. It's also beneficial to people, as has already been said, to people other than those that live in Malton. There are people that live in our district on the periphery in the Daventry, Buckley Field, way back, etc., who will also be able to use that. You probably might prefer to use that than one of the other Northampton facilities. So it's very good. That's a very good deal for both sides, the college and ourselves, and it fulfils a number of the council's different policies as well, and community objectives. So I'm very pleased with this one. A ready-made shell of a building, and most importantly, a site, and it's in our district. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just need to be cautious that I'm not staying into pink paper territory. I don't believe I am. But I just wanted to explore the issue of the £200,000 being transferred into a reserve and the potential for us to have to compensate the operator. Am I allowed to raise that now?
Chairman, I think if we're careful about what we say, that's probably one that can remain in open session.
Okay, ultimately, the question is whether, in light of the risk, we've given ourselves any protection in the form of our contracts with the contractors, or if we considered taking out insurance to protect ourselves in the case that we do, in layman's terms, default on that £200,000 reserve.
Sure. You happy? Thank you very much. I think we deal with that in general terms without disclosing anything in commercial confidence. The reason that is proposed is because at the moment we're still evolving the programme of works to the building, and therefore we can't agree with the operator at this point that they will have the building for precisely these periods and these works will be done then, and therefore allow the price to be precisely fixed. The price we are negotiating is going to be fixed now based on a certain set of assumptions. If those assumptions are wrong, they will lose income, and therefore it's reasonable to compensate for them. That's the mechanism. It's very simple what happens. A train operating company is affected by network rail, taking longer to reach some points or something. It's not really risk-free, sure, because it's all kind of under our control how long we spend doing work or which works we end up doing. I don't think any insurance company would be willing to offer a premium that would cover. But I'm hoping not to spend it, but it's sensible to have the buffer there in case the circumstances arise.
Thank you. Councillor Randall.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just reading about the Daventry town expenses, that the tennis courts on the Daventry rec. So I'm reading this right. So normally that's about 12k a year if it transfers over to the town council. That would be a saving, but we won't. Town council pick that cost up and not us. So that would be a saving to us, will it?
Mr. Chairman, the main reason for making that change is really to simplify the process of transfer to the town council for this council's groups, obviously subject to construction change already being made. It gets quite difficult, it's not impossible, but it gets messy and complicated to have a contract which relates to land that this council no longer owns. So if we remove it from this contract, where in any event it's not actually performing a sporting function, it was intended to, but those pitches aren't in use. There isn't a demand for it. So we don't gain anything by including it in the SL contract. And it just makes life that much simpler. In the short term, as the report says, until or unless the transfer happens, we'll just transfer the grounds maintenance to Daventry North using the same money. If the land transfers to the town council, it will clearly be given to the town council to decide how it wants to carry out that grounds maintenance.
And it would be a saving cost to us of 12,000 a year. We won't have to pay to North from this council.
Chairman, the land will, I suggest, need ground maintenance. So I don't think the £12,000 is a terribly unreasonable figure. So I suspect there isn't a vast savings there. The choice of how we achieve that is another question. But some money will need to be spent cutting the grass and all the other bits.
No, what I mean is it would be a 12,000 saving from this council. Not from the town council, we'll still have to pay to maintain it. But I mean, this council won't have to pay to maintain it.
Chairman, as long as the land is owned by this council, we'll have to maintain it. Once it becomes town council's land, the town council will need to maintain it.
And we will save £12,000 by not having to maintain it. That's
But that's wrapped up in all the other special expenses that we're going to transfer as well.
Okay. Before I go back to and close this one down, I just want to, it's just really a plea to all members that this is a wonderful facility to have on in the east of our district. And once again, we must commend our officers for purchasing and acquiring this asset. We do know there are many groups that are currently using this facility, and of course individually every one of them should be allowed to stay, but collectively that just isn't possible because the public can't use it. All I would ask you to do is to manage expectations. We will try to accommodate where we can these very, very important and worthwhile organisations, but at the end of the day we need to strike a balance between the fact that this is a public facility for the public and with regard to people that use it for good causes. So I'm not saying yay or nay to anything. What I'm saying is let us as elected members manage expectations and allow the officers to do their best for these particular groups. Deputy.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully endorse your comments on that particular issue. Ultimately, when things change, there are going to be some disappointed people at the end of that change, but I think the message that needs to go out from this room is one that what we're doing here is an extremely good thing. We're providing what will be a fantastic facility to the east of our district and what will ultimately be a great legacy to the new unitary authority, and I think we can be proud of that. One plea I would make is that those groups and companies and other organisations who are currently at the Chris Moody Centre are given as much notice as possible about our intentions with regards to their futures, so that they have sufficient time to plan ahead and to make the necessary arrangements to give themselves the best chance of prospering and continuing their activities in the best location possible. And I know from conversations earlier today that is very much this council's intention, and I'm grateful for those assurances that I've been given earlier today. I would just again repeat that I very much hope that we will give every possible support and as much notice as possible to any and every group that will be affected by the changes that are going to come. But ultimately this is a very good thing, and I think it will be something that Daventry District can be proud of in the years ahead.
Yeah, please let's defend this council. There will be some that will say that we are actually doing harm because we're now not allowing people. Listen, we're taking that over for the benefit of people, and if it wasn't for our endeavours, maybe that facility wouldn't even be there or would be vibrant. So let's be bullish about what we're trying to do, but also compassionate and understanding to those that may be using it. Councillor Hill's your last one.
Yeah. It's right what you're saying, because there are quite a few users, and one of the problems going back in the past is the fact that many of these users have had use of the centre at a very low rate and taken up quite a lot of time. Now, basically, when we take over, there will be some people who will be disappointed. But I know that the officers have worked diligently, and we've had, and you and I have attended meetings where we've talked to some of the users, and talks are underway. In the end, there have to be some decisions made. But I think the benefits and the all-round benefits to the people of that area from the other side of our district far outweigh anything else. Because quite frankly, if we don't run this, then there is a very, very severe danger that the whole lot will close. And then even the users will lose the use of this facility at all. So, to me, it's something that we must do. Let's move it on. It's well worthwhile, and it's been on the card for such a long time. It will leave, again, I keep talking about legacy, but it will leave a nice legacy for people within that side of the district and that surrounding area. So I would ask, and from what I gather, I think everybody is supportive of this.
Thank you. So let's take to the vote then, please. Those of you that agree with the recommendations, please indicate so. Thank you. Anyone against? And are there any abstentions? That's unanimous. Okay, I think this is the last one of yours. This is the Country Park Improvement Programme Business Plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're right, it is the final one. Basically, it's another business plan. As you said, it's the Country Park Improvement Plan. The recommendation is that the business plan for the refurbishment programme be approved. I go back many, many years ago when I first took over the Country Park as part of my portfolio. I coined the phrase, our jewel in the crown, and this has been proved. Visitors have increased by, in the region of about 25%. An additional 3,772 car parking tickets were purchased between April 2019 and September 2019 compared to the same period in 2018. It's certainly been very, very busy since we've carried out some of these alterations, particularly the changes to the kiddie play area, etc. I've spoken to a lot of parents and they think it's a great asset. Also, everybody on this council, you're all aware, we've been very successful in winning Green Flag Awards. The bar is raised each year, it becomes harder. And with the increased usage, we need to ensure the park continues to be fit for purpose. This means upgrading and improving the facilities as outlined. And when the improvements are completed, which includes the upgrade to the CAF and the toilet facilities, I believe it will be second to none. These improvements will benefit all users of our superb country park, not just locally, but the many outside visitors that we get as well. But it's there now and in the future. And again, we talk, many of these things that we've discussed tonight are about improvement and leaving a legacy when the district council is no longer in existence. So I would ask everybody to support this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second this one from Councillor Hills. Actually, I think on real reading, this is mainly a tidying up exercise. Actually, it is paid in actual fact. But as a ward member here for Daventry Happy South, I very much support this and obviously how it improves the facility. And I've nothing more to add, but I think it's impressive that we're doing this, and I'd like to give it full support.
Councillor Richard, please.
Thank you, Chair. I remember years and years ago, the Daventry Express had a big front page spread about how the council had managed to negotiate that the country park would be extended down through a corridor to the canal. The same idea of a corridor was talked about at great length when some here wanted to be able to sail down to the canal. But it was always put that that was actually an important thing that should happen, that there should be a green corridor that would be down there. It was a place where people would be able to walk and cycle. I'm surprised that we've got a document in front of us about what we do about the country park without any reference whatsoever to that extension.
Sorry, if we're dealing with the country park, why would we be refurbishing? Sorry.
Because it was an extension to the country park that was proposed.
Okay, sorry. Officer,
Chairman, it may be helpful. This report, and I'm conscious I'm dealing with but it says property. This report deals with refurbishing assets the council currently either owns or leases. The extensions to the country park will come through the developments to either side of the flood channel from the reservoir, the Monksmoor and the Churchfields development, as we know them, will deliver land into this council's ownership and control, but that should be delivered into this council's control in a fit state for quite some years in the future as part of the development scheme for those two sites. So there shouldn't be any need to refurbish it for 20 years.
If I can just come back on that, and I think it is very unfortunate the way in which you may have briefed the Daventry Express that created such a wave of expectation about what was going to happen to the country park. But from what we've heard, are we being told that if there are further delays in the Churchfield development, or if that for some reason doesn't actually happen, we are not, the plan for the extension of the country park is simply going to disappear?
I think we're straying off because we don't actually own that land. So can we just deal with the paper in front of us, Councillor? I totally respect where you come from, but maybe the debate is for some other time. Councillor Osborne.
Two questions. When does the current lease run out, and how much does it cost us per year?
I don't know that, I have no idea.
Chairman, current lease runs out next year, but it is a contracted-in lease, which means we have a protected commercial tenancy, and we're already in negotiations for renewal for another substantial period. The lease rate, I think, is about £20,000 a year.
Sorry?
I think it's about £20,000 a year, but we'll confirm that.
Thank you. So it's quite secure then?
It is. It would be difficult, it's not impossible, but very difficult for Broadways to prevent us from having a lease renewal. There's no indication they intend to try.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you confirm that by
No, that's fine. No, I'm happy with that, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hills, do you want to close your comments?
Yeah, basically, just try what's regarding the extension. That's something for the future discussion. What we're looking at is the business plan and getting this approved so that we can move forward and finish all the recommendations within the programme itself. And this is very worthwhile. It's very, very well used. You can see the increases that are coming. Yes, we charge a little bit for the car park, but that money all goes back towards funding improvements to the country park. The improvements that have been carried out so far have all been well received. The public, when you get down there and you talk to them and you get to the users, they welcome it, and I think they will welcome the additional when everything else is finished. So again, I feel it's something that we should, as a council, give our full support to.
Thank you. Okay. So let's take it to, if you agree to the recommendations, please so indicate.
Agree.
And if there are any opposed, And any abstentions? No, that's unanimous again, thank you. Councillor Crevens, your first presentation.
Thank you, Chairman.
It's good. You're being read the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy.
That's right. You'll see page 95 of the papers today, the report by officers and the draft that is going to, or we're proposing to put out to consultation. So it's a resolved item, and what we're asking you tonight is to resolve the consultations undertaken with relevant stakeholders and wider public on the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy as we've got here. That strategy is at page 99 to 127. I'll give you a bit of a background on why we're doing this and what we're doing. The Homelessness Act 2002 places the duty on all local authorities to produce a strategy. We already have a strategy that is contained within the Strategic Housing Plan 2014 from 2019, and that's due for renewal. And it currently combines this with the housing, empty homes and homelessness strategy together in one document. This will actually combine into one document. Now, on the 1st of April 2018, the Homelessness Reduction Act came into being, which places a lot more responsibilities on local authorities to ensure that they deal with homelessness, introducing new duties, enhanced duties to non-priority homelessness people. Now, following on from that, in August 2018, the government produced the National Rough Sleeping Strategy, which is asking basically us to update and rebadge our homelessness strategy going forward. Now, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government has asked for this to be done and put into place before the end of this year. Now, but the Council is not obliged to comply with that, but we are putting forward this strategy that you have before you today. Now, the strategy itself, so for pages 99 through to 127, we're proposing to put this out to consultation from the 15th of November, so that will be as from tomorrow, through to the 20th of December. We have had a homelessness review, back in the latter part of this year, and that has sort of like focused us on what we're putting forward in our strategy going forward. So we've already been out to stakeholders and other people asking really what their views are and what they would like to see in this document. So this has largely focused us here with what we've got before us today. We've got 4 new aims. If I refer you to page the aims of the strategy on page 120. We've got 4 new aims in our strategy here. Basically, the council wants to achieve is to maximise the use of our council properties we have to reduce homelessness as much as we can, using suitable housing, also to engage with rough sleepers in a timely manner and make sure that we try and keep as many people off the streets as we possibly can. Referring to page 124, we have an action plan. That's something that the central government is asking us to do, is have an action plan. And that action plan is set out at page 124 to 127. And this will be regularly monitored and reported back to me as portfolio holder. So basically all I'm asking tonight is that we resolve that this will be put out to public consultation. And the proposal is that obviously that will come back to the council at the end of the consultation period on the 20th of December, when it will come back to the council, and then it will come through to full council, I understand, at another point if there are any changes, and it to be formally rectified into policy.
Thank you, Councillor Crevens. Councillor Osborne.
The way I've just heard it presented and what I've read is we're adopting a policy. We're very shortly to become a unitary, so I would expect it to be a policy that South Northampton and Northampton Borough, if they are part of the unitary, and ourselves also adopt. I would not like us to be part of a situation like Northampton Borough, where you drive into Northampton at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and there's people sleeping in every shop doorway up Daventry Street in sleeping bags. And until very recently, a few months ago, until a policy was altered by the Borough Council, there were people sleeping all over the churchyard, messing, defecating, everything, all over the churchyard, and people visiting the churchyard the next day. People don't want to go shopping in Northampton, and shopping gets less and less. You can see. Well, that's one reason why I don't want to go. You just have to tread over people to get into the shops that are open on a Sunday. I'm just hoping that what we're doing, Northampton Borough will be doing, along with South Northampton. I would hate to see what they've got there creeping into our area, and we're getting the same thing in Daventry. Okay. With people sleeping rough on the high street, perhaps in a couple of years' time, because Northampton's full up.
I'm sure we see, rough sleeping as an issue of sadness, and we have compassion for people rather than sort of a nuisance, really. I think that so I'm sure that's what you meant. But with regard to the collaboration, presumably part of that would be the. Sorry.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
I mean, to say, if Councillor Osborne looks at page 96 of the report, basically explains where we are at the moment. We have, this will be an interim policy that we're putting into place, which will, when if the unitaries come into force, then they will then pick up and take that forward. Each council so far within the proposed unitary had their own policy. We have looked at this to see whether or not we could have adopted a one-all policy at this stage, but it wasn't thought appropriate at this stage because of the different processes that they've got in place at the moment and the different journeys that they're going through at the moment. They've got their policies that are coming forward and last for so many years, etc. So the proposal is this will be an interim policy for Daventry District, and when we come forward to our unitary, whatever that shape or form that will take, then the new policy will then come into place going forward. But from what Councillor Osborne is saying is obviously we are fortunate in Daventry District that we don't have as much of a problem for rough sleepers that Northampton unfortunately does. This policy will actually try and address any situation that comes forward and try and stop it before it gets to that point. That's one of the main purposes of this strategy is to encourage the district council to do their very, very best to not allow people to become homeless in the first place. And anybody that is a rough or identifies as a rough sleeper is dealt with and given compassionate help as and when appropriate.
Thank you, Harold. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's a lot of laudable aims in this strategy, and it's an issue that is absolutely vital that we tackle to ensure that everyone has a home. Where I think it falls short, and I think maybe we have an issue that falls between two different policy areas and certainly two different strategies, is that the document recognises the fact that we don't have a supply of sufficient affordable accommodation, and it does take steps within the aims to try and maximise the availability of accommodation. But I would have liked, I know that currently we're really only considering going out to consultation, but would just like to express an opinion that I would have liked to have seen more ambition in terms of ensuring that our planning strategy is sufficient and is ambitious enough in terms of delivering affordable housing.
When you have actual premises to put people in.
Well, the supply of affordable housing across the whole of West Northamptonshire. And moreover, that when we do have a situation, as happens, when developers promise a certain amount of affordable housing and then by hook or by crook enable that promise, I'd like to see an undertaking to be more effective in our enforcement action, if possible. I know planning law is complex, but those are my thoughts. you know my thoughts on consultations generally, but I think the findings of this consultation will be really interesting to say the least. I hope that we go out and we consult with groups such as Shelter and the CAB and other interested parties and make sure that we get their feedback on this, because it's absolutely vital that we get it right.
I think with regards to the affordable housing question, certainly having just come from that, we are relentless with regard to ensuring that developers provide that which they are required to provide. And we will push back if we feel that that they were falling short of their responsibilities. But I also think this is also actually maybe not about affordable housing, it is about people that may be in affordable housing and for some reason have become homeless. And it's about providing appropriate accommodation on an emergency level. Is there anything you want to add to that before we move on to Adam's points?
No, I think, so just to give Councillor Brown sort of reassurance, is obviously that you can put your comments in as a wonderful consultation. Yeah, and then obviously we will take on board everything that comes back, and that will direct us in a way that if we need to make changes, then they will obviously be incorporated into any document that comes back to full council to be discussed and debated at a later stage. But no, I say obviously being relatively new into this portfolio, I'm really pleased that we're doing this. And so fortunately in Daventry we don't have such a big problem as Northampton does, but we still recognise that we do have an issue. And as Councillor Auger, the chairman, said, is that it's not just the availability of the housing, it's what people that get themselves into situations through no fault of their own, that they are evicted from the housing that they're in. And that can be something as simple as the fact that landlords decide to sell up the house and these people have nowhere to live.
Yeah, we're not closing out the debate yet, but let's just answer Councillor Brown's. In fact, we normally save up, don't we, when we come to you at the end, so that's a bit of bad chairmanship by me. But Councillor Randall and Councillor Bishop, please.
I think it was yesterday on social media I saw that there were a few concerned residents because there was a young woman rough sleeping in one of the shop doorways in the town and nobody knew what to do. And that was a big concern. Nobody knew. It was like 6:30 in the morning. They said she was, skimpily dressed, really cold, and they didn't know who to contact. So for me, it's putting out there, having visual displays somewhere. If you see somebody, who needed help, whether it's outside office hours, where to go, who to contact, and that is a big thing for me, knowing where to go and who to contact.
Yeah.
Because I know at the moment, if you phone into the council and it's after office hours and you find a rough sleeper and it tells you to phone the Northampton Borough, and if you phone the Northampton Borough, they'll tell you probably that they haven't got anywhere. And then what you do, and then people don't know what to do. So that, that is a big thing, just knowing what to do.
Yeah, Mary, do you want to?
I mean, we might only operate our housing options team during office hours Monday to Friday, but I can assure you we have 24/7 emergency provision available. If you phone the Daventry District Council number, you do get put through to a Northampton number, and they will and do pick up emergency homeless cases. We provide anybody any day of the week who needs ours with emergency accommodation. So if you see somebody in that situation, you can phone the police or you can encourage them to contact the number on the council website and work through the council number. So it's not they won't just be turned away. If somebody is in need of emergency accommodation, we will pick that up every day.
Councillor, do you want
Well,
to
I googled it and it said to get in touch with StreetLink, and StreetLink have direct contact with local authorities because I have phoned the out of hours number, and like I say, it does give you a number and then it'll tell you where it's available, but if the person can't get there, there's no buses on at that time, you're in that sort of situation. So it's just about being there and where
How long
to
ago
go.
was that? Did that incident happen?
That would have been last year. But I don't know whether things are, I know we haven't got any provision in this district that I'm aware of that immediately you could get shelter for that night.
No, through you, Gemma, we do. If somebody is in need of emergency accommodation today, when they're entitled, we will through our arrangement with Northampton Borough, we will find them accommodation for that.
Okay,
If somebody's concerned about somebody who's sleeping, because invariably they're sleeping because they haven't tried to get help, then what you can do, if you're really concerned, if somebody's skimpy dressed, cold, whatever, go to the police. But in any case, please encourage everyone and anyone you hear about such cases to tell us, because we will go out and investigate. We will go out in the middle of the night, we'll go out on a weekend.
Right, okay.
Councillor Allen, just to reemphasise, it's a fear for welfare, it's a classic police call, and we will always respond. So in those cases where it obviously needs an emergency, then they can sort out with the other statutory and voluntary agencies how to deal with it. But let's move on to Councillor Ritchie and then Councillor Osborne, and we'll close.
Yes, I appreciate this is a sort of consultation in which you would expect most of the responses to come from professionals, from organisations that are working in this field. If you seriously want responses from ordinary residents, if there's such a thing as an ordinary resident, or concerned residents about these issues, could I suggest that somebody, perhaps from the press office, Stephen, just looks a little bit at the wording. I'm looking at page 105. What have we achieved? Now, Councillor Osborne has been giving a very sort of graphical description about the situation in Northampton. We've heard about somebody being found very much in need of help in Daventry. But what have we achieved? We've procured and implemented an IT system. We've developed close links with partners. We've facilitated communications between agencies and so on. And at some point, we actually say that we have helped people who were in real difficulty and spelled out in a way that ordinary people can envisage what these problems were. I mean, this strikes me as being a very, very bureaucratic paper about a response to what are very human problems that we're up against.
Okay.
But my second point, and this is an issue that we've raised often in relation to other consultations. I find it difficult to believe that our staff, committed although they are actually going to spend the Saturday and Sunday before Christmas collating the responses to this consultation. If they're not going to be doing that, why have we got the closing date as being the 20th of December, a Friday? Would if somebody only wrote their response on Saturday the 21st, would we not accept it? Clearly nothing's going to happen to it. And by the way, if you had put that the closing date was not going to be the 20th of December, but the Monday the 23rd would that be?
Yeah.
Staff are not going to work before Christmas. Nothing like this, are they?
Okay.
Why do we have an artificially tight deadline? This consultation could easily go on until the first week in January. And it may be that the Christmas period will give people more to think about around about the issue of homelessness.
Okay, we'll get some answers for that. But with regard to what we've achieved, on page 127, they talk about the performance and the monitoring of the adoption of this strategy. And I'm sure that we will be testing exactly how many people we prevented, how many people we've dealt with on an emergency basis. And that will come with regard to once the strategy is in place, you then test the tactics as to whether they're working or not. So let's get the strategy up and running, let's get the tactics deployed, and then we can start monitoring on exactly what we're doing. But so Councillor really wants to offer his views.
Chairman, I think probably just a couple of comments. I appreciate the document is fairly dry. It has to address what are bureaucratic processes and they have to be described. That's kind of unavoidable. Having said which, if you look on page 136, A4, there's a very clear, I think, understandable objective response to reports of rough sleeping, ensuring the sleeper responds adequately to the rough sleeper, and this is done within 24 hours of being reported. So there are concrete actions which are documented, people can grasp, even if some of the items may be hard for that man in the street to grasp. In relation to the time of the consultation, we are proposing a normal 6-week period. Realistically, you could extend the consultation forever. And there would always be an argument that just after the end of whenever it was you did finish it, someone would argue you have to have an end. Yes, staff do work in the period right up to Christmas. I will be in the office on the 24th, and I know quite a bit of my staff will be. So yes, I imagine the responses will be analysed in that period. I wouldn't even bet on getting staff not logging in and having a look on Saturday. They are pretty dedicated.
Thank you. And Councillor Rich, I know you're an activist out there, so go out and encourage people to engage in this consultation and get as many responses as you can. Your responsibility as a ward of councillor. Councillor Osborne will speak, hear your words, and then we'll close this one out.
Just 2 points. The affordable housing bit, I don't like the terminology. I've never liked it. If you go back in time, when Right to Buy came in, I support, like a lot of people did support. But this Conservative-run council at the time supported right to replace, and we lobbied the government, as well as being able to sell council houses, we wanted to be able to replace them as well. In other words, to keep a rental stock. That didn't happen, as we know. And then the government, mainly the Conservative government, over the years, tried to get the council rents to the same level as the market price rents.
Sorry, this is actually about the sleeping rough strategy.
This does come
into them.
Yeah. Don't worry, I won't go around Wilton to get to the South Brook.
Well, at the moment, I'm far left.
I forget where I was now. Right.
About the government with affordable housing.
Yeah, the affordable housing bit. I supported the rents going to the same price as market price rents, and they've gradually done so. I think, in looking back, that was a mistake, because all the rental properties that councils have or housing associations have now are far too highly priced, because they're the same price. All you're doing is producing another private landlord, in effect. There are no sort of cheaper houses, which there was years ago. So, Adam's point where he was talking about when developers provide affordable housing and then they renege on it or they don't want it, it annoys the planning committee like mad when that happens, when they come back. But as we all know that sit on planning committee, it doesn't happen until it's independently looked at that the figures don't stack up for them. And that's the way we have to do it by our government. So there's a few things gone wrong while people are sleeping rough. That contributes to it over the last sort of 20 years of right to buy, going through something that's called affordable housing, which isn't affordable anymore. It's open market rental. That's what it should be called.
Okay, sir. Well, thank you for your insight. I think we'll take it to the vote now. Those of you who are happy to resolve this, please do so, and please indicate. And are there any opposed at all? And are there any abstentions? That's unanimous, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Cribbins. Okay, so yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. The first of only 3 this time, Chairman.
Thank you.
This concerns the local development scheme for Daventry district. It's a regulatory requirement that local development plans are developed in accordance with an agreed local development scheme, which is effectively a timetable. All we're asking here is a recommendation that we should adapt the current local development scheme, which was adopted in 2017 following the adoption of the West Northamptonshire Joint Course Strategy, that we need to modify that because of the delay in the production of the adoptable version of the Part 2 Settlements and Countryside Local Plan. So this is simply saying, please can we change the local development scheme timetable to reflect the extended period of the examination of the local development plan, settlement and countryside plan, local plan part 2. And on page 130, section 4.2, we have the suggested updated timetable. I would like to insert a brief caveat here, Chairman. We're suggesting that we might lead to adoption of the part 2 plan in February 2020. This is subject, of course, to the planning inspectorate completing their report so that we've got it in adoptable form. Unfortunately, we've heard recently from the inspector that because of the period of purdah, among other excuses, it is being bandied around at the moment, there will be a delay in his production of his final report. And so he's thinking that the production of the report may not be in time to be on the agenda for February Council, which is what this timetable is aimed at. But we do have in mind that should that be the case, we could organise a special council meeting in order to adopt it. So this then simply is that we recommend to Council that we update the local development scheme for Daventry District in order to accommodate the delay in the production of the Settlements and Countryside Part 2 plan. And for the avoidance of doubt, this does not affect the local development scheme for the West Northamptonshire Strategic Plan, which will be updated in the fullness of time when we've finished completing the West Northamptonshire Strategic Plan.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. Any comments at all? No, thank you. Let's take it to a vote then. Those of you that are happy to recommend this, please do so.
Agreed.
It's all right, I'm just saying I didn't read all those papers because I knew that I trusted Alan.
Anyone against? And are there any abstentions? No. Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you, sir. And Councillor Chandler, to number 2.
Yes, this is about asking for direction. It's a resolved item. Members will be aware of asking for directions because we've come across them a lot in association with conservation areas. And we know that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what they're for in that context. This is rather special. You will probably be aware that currently government policy has been changed to allow permitted development of office space into residential accommodation. We worry about that on 2 scores. One is that quite often there is evidence that the residential accommodation that is produced from converting office space is substandard in some way, usually it's too small. And secondly, of course, the office space that we have in Daventry District is valuable and is much used. The article for direction would simply mean that anybody who wished to convert their office space to residential would have to apply for permission, and that will give us the opportunity to control that development. It is important that this happens quickly, which is another reason why it's a resolved item, Chairman. I'm happy to answer questions if anybody's bothered with what it's about, but I think I've just given you the basis.
I will let the deputy go first. All right, and then you.
Thank you, Chairman. I remember a recent case at planning that it was a proposed development of houses at the end. Previously, it had been an application for commercial properties on the border of Weedon and Dodland parishes on the site of the old A1 Cafe. Members. Now, one of the arguments used by the planning officers to advise the committee to support the application was that the committee had previously given its consent to the commercial development, and if that commercial development had gone ahead, which it didn't in the end, then under permitted development rights they'd have been able to convert to housing anyway.
Yeah.
So is there any chance that we can add Weedon to the list? It's the long and the short of it, you know. Clearly there was a concern in that case, a legitimate concern, I'd argue, that there was potential for commercial property to be then flipped, if you like, into domestic property. So clearly there's a loophole there within the Weedon area. Can we not close that loophole by adding Weedon to the list of changed areas?
I don't know the answer.
Chairman, it is a rather technical point. There are no B1A officers in Weedon that are eligible for conversion. Therefore, we could make an offer for conversion, but it would have no effect because there's nothing that it can bite on. So, when the government moved from a temporary resident development to a permanent one, it changed a number of details. And one of them was the base date, and that's probably the difference to submission. So we don't need to act in Weedon because there is nothing in Weedon that could convert under the development right as it stands.
Yes, certainly.
Are you saying therefore that were commercial offices to be built now in Weedon, then that permitted development right would not exist?
That's correct.
Okay, so I agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I fear I might display my ignorance on this question. I do apologise. How would it, for instance, affect this building we're in the future when we're unitary if there was a desire to turn this into residential property?
What Mr. Vinson's retirement mansion.
Yeah. Give me if that's the wrong question in terms of the classification, but it's a curious thought because post this council anything can happen that might want to use this.
Should we go to this?
I don't know what the detailed classification of this building is, whether it's B1A.
Chairman, I have a suspicion this building may be what Helen knows to be generous. I am mixed use that doesn't fit into use class. I can't be certain, however, it is possible that the permitted development right applies to this building, but it's not one that was felt necessary at this stage to protect against conversion.
If I might add, I think it would have to go to the planning committee in any case and have a planning application in order to meet with the general provisions of the Daventry Planning Act. Because you will build very dodgy ground to do such a thing without going through.
But a potential use in the future, of course.
I'm getting excited about it.
Councillor Morgan is saying, obviously, this isn't planning with it happening at all. It's like asking them to make a planning application to come forward with the most. But just a question of Simon Bowers, really. I mean, obviously, I appreciate we're applying it to the wards that we've asked here, and following on from Councillor Brown's question about Weedon, I take it you've done a full understand across the whole district of which parent or which wards would need this to have it applied to. So the ones that aren't here, am I assuming that there are no properties falling within B1A in any of the ward that isn't listed here?
Chairman, there is some B1A outside these areas. The report sets out the logic we've tried to approach. We have to have a sort of rational, justifiable basis for making untoward direction. The government allows and accepts local bodies will make them, but it does not encourage the use of it, it's safe to say. So we have to be able to defend the position we've gone with, as the report sets out, is using the strategic employment areas that are defined in the core strategy and in the census country plan and Daventry Town Centre with all previous employment centres that we need to protect. There are quite a scattering of small B1A offices across the district. Trying to capture all of those with up to 4 elections is probably disproportionate.
Thank you. Just one observation, really. I just find, I suppose we've also got to be careful about this. I'm not one for, if the government want us to be able to convert office space to dwellings because we need more dwellings and make it easy, I think that is something that we should be doing. I think that's something important. We need houses back. I appreciate that if we are going to put a restriction on it, it still does go through some due process in that the local democracy, the planning will ultimately have the final say as to whether that is a reasonable thing to do or not. So,
I mean, through you, Chairman, instead of it being a permitted development right, it require planning application to be determined either by officers or the planning committee.
Yeah.
So that's all you're bringing in.
Yeah, so just a check and balance.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, for those of you that are happy to resolve this, please thank you. And anyone to object against it? And are there any abstentions? No? Thank you. That's another unanimous one. Well done. Okay, just one more to get through then, I think.
Yeah, this is locality planning and the brownfield region. It's a list of 6 recommendations. I didn't intend to go through these all in detail. I think they're fairly clear cut, but I do want to refer particularly to one of them, which I will come to. But basically, we want to change the approach to determining applications for neighbourhood areas, which is the first stage of the neighbourhood development plan, simply because it doesn't necessarily represent the most effective and efficient way of dealing with these things. And so we must, of course, permit neighbourhood areas which don't precisely reflect parish boundaries, where there's a special circumstance or people decide that they want to do that. But if they do, we need to make sure that things don't get held up because of the process. So we're suggesting that we rescind the process which we had agreed in May 2012, that we grant authority, delegated authority to the Executive Director of Business to approve applications for neighbourhood areas which don't correspond to a parish boundary, rather than them having to come to planning committee. That the approach in procuring a framework for neighbourhood planning services is rescinded. There's been little demand for that. There's no competition, so it doesn't seem pointful to continue with the approach that we had then. Charges for locality planning cease to be applied. If you look at paragraph 4.3, it talks about there's been fairly limited activity apart from neighbourhood development plans. We've only had 5 village design statements in the last 8 years, but we've had 14 neighbourhood development plans made in that period, and the council has only raised a very modest amount of income by charging for certain services associated with that, averaging about £165 a year, and I guess that you and I could guess that it costs more than that to administer that charge, so that doesn't seem to be pointful. You can't predict when it might arise, so it's not particularly helpful with resource planning, so let's forget it. But the point I wanted to draw attention to was the brownfield register. We're required by government to maintain a public register of previous developed land which might be suitable for residential development. We've done this, of course, because we always do what government wants us to do, but there's very little demand locally for a brownfield register. In other words, there haven't been anybody wanting to look at it to see where they might find some previously developed land that might be right for development. So there's no need to consider adding sites to part 2 of the register, which is the ones that are effectively given outline permission by being there. And so to avoid unnecessary use of the planning committee's time, it's recommended that delegated authority be given for formally carrying out the annual review of the brownfield register. And the slight modification to the recommendation number 5. At the moment it says that the approach to the Council's brownfield register agreed in October 2017 be revised as set out in section 4.4 of the report. Well, that's entirely accurate, Chairman, but when this appears at Council, it won't be accompanied by the report, and people will say, well, what's that about? Because it just says as advised. So I'm suggesting a modification of the wording of that part of the recommendation. I have it here in print, which I'm happy to hand over to the clerk to save them trying to make a note. But the suggestion is that that one should read that the approach to the Council's Brownfield Register agreed in October 2017 be revised such that applications would be made through an open invitation on the Council's website and then determined by Planning Committee as set out in section 4.4 of the report. So that's just a simple half-sentence summary of what that section of the report says for the benefit of people reading the resolution that comes before council without benefit of having the report in front of them and perhaps haven't had the time to go back through the archive and read it.
That sounds pretty fair. Officer certainly to my left agrees. So is that, we have to bring that to, so when we come to it, we'll be agreeing back to you. Okay. Anyone thinking? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just curious, obviously the report sets out very clearly that there's been very little local demand for the Brownfield Register itself. I'd agree with the report's characterisation that there isn't all that much brownfield land in Daventry district because of the nature of the area. It's not like Birmingham where you have the old Longbridge factory site that's recently been developed and the old industrial heartland where there's plenty of brownfield development. But one of the objections you always get from people opposed to rural developments is why don't you go and build on brownfield land? So I would be interested just to know precisely how many brownfield sites we have in the district. I don't expect anyone to know off the top of their heads. I'd be very fascinated. But if that information could be disseminated.
The register is a public document, Chairman. I suggest to Councillor Brown that he has a look at it.
He is the deputy.
Fair enough.
Do you know how to access it though?
Google is my friend.
Do you think, can you share with us how we access it? We'll have a look ourselves. We don't want an email, we're quite happy to do it ourselves. So.
Chairman, the council's website, insert the word brownfield register in the search bar and it will pop up.
You knew that was coming, didn't you? Yeah, thank you
Won't
for
take long to read.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Can we go to the recommendations if you agree? 1 through 6, please, indicate agree. And any abstentions? And any objections? No, thank you, that's unanimous. And thank you, Councillor Chandler, for your input. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I wish Councillor Brown had mentioned Birmingham. It's upset me now.
One day, sir, one day.
Anyway, thank you very much. So, Chair, it's the first time presenting a paper in front of you, and I think I've never actually been in this chamber when Councillor Miller's not been here, so it's a very unusual exercise. Anyway, so this first paper that I'm presenting is really the Council's Treasury Management mid-year, so we're already at that point in the year. It's a very straightforward document, we're always required to produce it, it should be very familiar to members. And as always, I intend to only point out a couple of items of salient interest. The first one, Chair, is in relation to the 3.3 section. It talks here about the Council's capital expenditure and a review of the Council's investment portfolio. For the avoidance of doubt, the shillitory apostrophe is there because we're only talking about the District Council, and that is relevant. I'm making that point, not pedantic, because a bit later on the table on page 173, we actually talk about all of the money, and of course that's also money that we're holding or collecting, which goes to other councils, so it's a relevant point. Now, that said, the paper always sets out the economic updates and is a kind of mixture of gazing forward and also where we are. And really that enables us to kind of set our strategy in terms of how we manage the monies that we have available and also money that we're looking after. Now, we'll then next go to 6.1. And on 6.1 we have the capital expenditure by team table that again members will be familiar with. The one item to point out here is the difference between the outturn position, the projected outturn position, and the approved budget. And you'll see on the bottom line total there is a difference between the two. It's actually, on the face of it, it looks favourable. In other words, we haven't yet spent as much money as we projected. And actually that's because of slippage in the works, of which we mentioned some of those on 172 in the first couple of reports. The next item to draw to your attention is 173, the table there. I always like to point this out, particularly some members always get fixated that this 67 million is our money. I was quite looking forward to Councillor Parker being here this evening, because at the last meeting he raised, can we break it down? Councillor Kevin Parker. He sits quietly over the back there until this item comes up, and then he usually raises a question, Chair. And his question usually is, can we have this broken down so we know whose money is whose? But in actual fact, that really, on further reflection, this is really a duplication of work, because the next report, the medium-term financial plan, that all actually breaks it down anyway. So that 67 million is what we're basically looking after. It's a moving feast, it's coming and going, as you know, all the time. And the important point to point out here is on 7.3, it tells you that we had £67,000 more in interest so far than we had budgeted for or forecast, which is positive news for us. And then finally on 9, it draws to a conclusion. It says obviously it's uncertainty as always. You've not known one of these reports for years that doesn't talk about uncertainty, but the good point is we have actually got £67,000 more in interest than we thought we should in the coffers, which is good news. That's all for that, Chair. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Anyone for anything? Councillor Randall.
Yeah, I was just reading a little bit on Reach for Health, just saying that the contracts not be completed until the lease with the Daventry District Sports Club have been completed. Do we know when that's likely to be, or?
Is Simon the best place to answer that one specifically?
It says the construction contracts have been drawn up and agreed with the contractor, but cannot be completed until the lease with the Daventry District Sports Club has been completed. These legal matters are now delaying the commencement of works on the site.
The new rehabilitation building you're referring to, aren't you?
Yeah, that's Reach for Health building, isn't it?
Yes. Is Simon the best place to answer that one, perhaps, or whoever's managing the contract?
Yes, thank you.
The lease and the contract I signed last Friday. We haven't gone through the exchange process yet, but the other side is happy with the documents and I've instructed their solicitors to do so. So, as far as I can be sure tonight, it's as good as done.
Chairman, if I may further interject, since I've left the chance to speak to the Chief Executive, the lease and both our sublease and our sub-sublease to Reach for Health have both been entered into.
To be fair, Councillor Randall, I apologise because I had that information and I was waiting to send it all out, but I was just waiting for the dots to be dotted and the T's to be crossed. So I probably could have sent it out and given you a flavour. Oh, okay. So that and when that comes out, I will send it out to every single council. But I appreciate that is sort of thing that we want to get out as soon as possible, and it was on our mind. We're just waiting for things to be finalised. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And well, there you go. So that's that's the good thing about these reports, isn't it? They're written a couple of weeks back, and of course events keep occurring in the meantime.
Councillor, just one thing. We had a very good meeting on Monday. Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Frost and Councillor Harris, part of S&I, put together a public consultation with climate emergency. And one of the things that came up from the public was about whether we as a council invest in companies or banks that are like oil, that are involved in oil and exploration, all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, that's going one way, but it would be maybe interesting that may be coming our way, to actually to sort of ponder that, to see whether that's one way that the district council, if possible, could look at support of climate. But that was certainly one of those that came out.
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. I have indeed just been noting the list that appears in our papers this evening.
All right, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that,
Yeah, Chair, of course, you can see, I mean, it's very transparent, those that we have deposits with currently, and obviously there may be any updates in terms of requirements about, position of those. I mean, these are banks, these are not, these are not like oil companies.
No, they'll have a range. It's about vested. I'm just sort of saying this is what the public will consult and these are the sort of things they will come up with. So it may be something to be pre-warned with.
Yes, well, I think on that one, Chair, that would have to be a policy of council in terms of any due diligence on these, but we need to be mindful as well, because these rates are already pretty conservative, right, in some cases. But probably our Treasury team does the best to get these rates, and of course that's how we're able to put 67,000 back into the coffers. But there is an I wanted to make one point about that, actually. I do wish, given the topic and my own interest in environmental issues as a sustainability person, that we'd had a little bit more notice for that meeting, because I would like to have attended myself. And I didn't think we had much notice, but that's a separate point. Okay, thank you, Chair. Right.
I'll take up with the Chair best of mine.
Please.
No, like you.
I did note it, but it was too short, and that would have been a very interesting debate and a conversation.
It was a very good debate, but it was just something that came up and it sort of hit my mind. Okay, so we go to agreement of the Treasury Management Statement. Thank you. Any abstentions and any objections? So thank you, councillors. And then capital and revenue budget and medium-term financial plan.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a chunky one, but I appreciate the members have already read it. It's not my intention to go down and read out every single item on the list. I'd like to take them as a block. But what I would like to do is actually talk through a couple of the key points. At these points in the meeting, it's usually customary when we look at the medium-term financial plan to reflect on how much money Councillor James has spent on this money in the meeting. But it appears that Councillor Hills has been spending all the money. And it's really interesting, actually, when you hold this portfolio holding role for a little while, you realise how much money has been spent or actually invested in our communities. And it's been great to support those this evening. So, without further ado, let's run over and walk through a couple of the key pages. One of the most important future elements that's going to come our way, of course, as we know, is unitary. And one of the requests in here this evening is for an increase in the expenditure for the deployment of resources to the tune of another £866,000. In the previous meeting of strategy, you would have heard me mention this was coming. And this is, of course, money and work we're doing currently, which is technically at risk. Because, as we've seen from the Chief Executive in terms of the Council Courier and yourself, leader, there has been updates on structural change orders. And of course, there is an element of uncertainty there as it goes through the election. But nonetheless, working on the basis of both business as usual and forward planning, which needs to be done in order to make that vesting date, there is a request for that money in there this evening. Okay, the next point is, then we go to the page 177. Again, we always present a revenue reserves projections. And it takes currently from 2018 to 2023-24. And you've seen this table before. This was approved back in July. Now, what we then do, we basically add a lot of assumptions in and projections, which are featured in 3.4, which take us from A to K. I'm going to take us through a couple of those. And then we get to the new table, or the updated table, which we actually approved this evening, which is on 183, which is 5.1. Now, the eagle-eyed ones amongst you will notice what we've done here, we've rolled it forward a year, so you get 24, 25 at the end of the table, and as a result of that, we shuffle it along. But there was a little gremlin in the works, and there's a minus sort of 1.5 million or so, 1.8 million pounds adrift because of the columns, which is why you have this separate document in front of you. I'm sure you all spotted that error. So the table on 183 is to be replaced with this one when you look at it shortly, okay? Now, it's actually quite material, this, and I'll take you to it now just while we're on it, because you'll notice that on 5.1 in the original document, we actually end up on balances brought forward at the end of the cycle at 12.399. Because the number we start on should be 15.795, not 17.563 millions, then the end position should be 10.631 and not 12.399. You can see it doesn't take a genius to work out that's quite a chunk of money, less than the projection on 183 says. And when we say about spending our money, we always obviously need to spend it wisely, because as you can see throughout, and I'll keep you on the separate page now, the budget deficit after 21-22 starts building up quite rapidly. So we actually move from a position of surplus to deficit, and of course we have this conversation in this chamber sometimes where people say to us, oh, we won't be here then, but of course the taxpayers of Daventry District will be here then, and we have the necessity to pass on the council in a financially sound position, which we will do, but you can see it gets more challenging further out. Now what I'd like to do next is take your attention to page 178 and actually give you a couple of highlights which basically go to form Daventry we've got in a separate document. And there's a little bit of good news here actually. On 4.3 it talks about the NMDR business rate reset, and in the short term this is now not going to be reset, and this does basically keep money which we projected in the pot, which is helpful to us. The next point I would like to point out is as we go down to 4.9 on 179. Now the new homes bonus is actually problematic news for us, and is one of the reasons why the money sweeps away in the future. Now between 4.9 and 4.12 it actually builds up the picture and the risk here, and I'd like to quickly draw your attention to the 4.12 where it actually says here over the following 3 financial years, there is a cumulative loss from this funding to the council of £10.393 million. It's quite a significant hit to us, which is why we always need to be cautious. And you can see that working through the numbers, what impact that makes to us. We'll have to wait and see exactly how this pans out in future. Of course, during these meetings, we always give updates on these as we get new insights from government, etc. A couple more things to draw to your attention. So in section E on page 180, we have the revenue growth bits. And of course, some of those, as we move into page 181, have been spoken about this evening. And we're obviously available for any of those specific questions. A couple of those actually, and I drew this out when I was in my this evening's session. If you look at things such as external works to Lodge Road offices, members will be familiar, we've had to spend money in various ways, investing in this building, and of course the question will always come back, if we're going to vacate it, possibly Unitary, why should we invest in it? And of course the reality is a lot of this is either good upkeep to keep the building in good order, or in some cases because we have to for regulatory compliance, health and safety reasons, etc. So there's a fee there, for instance. We then move, I'm going to move on to the next page then, and look at the local government reorganisation. Just a little bit more detail there, because basically what we're asking for there for the future Northamptonshire programme is the £866,000. So it's quite a significant sum of money which is being put in by all the local authorities and the unitaries, and of course that has to be spent for us to meet our timetables. The next point I'd like to make, really finally wrapping up on some of those actually, and there's a lot of detail here this evening. I'm not intending to reread the whole paper to you, but if you go to 4.20, then we have the annual council tax increase. And what we're proposing here for recommendation for this evening is that we keep to the £5. And obviously as we go through the cycle throughout the year, then you'll see how those numbers work at a detailed level. But that's really quite an important point to set that this evening. Then I think finally if we go and have a look at the capital programme on page 184 section 6, again there's an item there for an extra £70,000, 6.3 for these offices again for electrical distribution boards. And obviously some items that have been spoken about earlier on in this evening's meeting, and some of those that we're familiar with in terms of schemes that we've already spoken about before, which have got revisions on, and these are page 184, 185 onwards. And I think a lot of the next few pages is basically detailed what you've spoken about before we then actually go on to page 189, which is the updated capital programme, which is a reflection of all these items. And of course then you've got the tables at the back. Now there is one other table that you have got in front of you on this big document here, the A3 document, and that is Appendix A. The reason you've got that is because on the other error, of course, would have carried across not only from this document you see, but also would have carried across to Appendix A. And actually, the number that we've got incorrect is the general reserve balance brought forward, and that's why you've got this document. So ignore Appendix A in your papers and refer to that one if you need to. So in conclusion there, basically there is of course a lot of activity going on, as we've already spoken about, many developments, plus the usual running costs for the council, but a risk going forward into the longer term, particularly if we wasn't here, if we are here as a Daventry District Council, that we're going to need to be particularly focused on over the coming year or two in terms of the deficit, based on some of those risks in the numbers. With that, Chair, I'd like to put that forward to recommendation to you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor, can I Councillor Dowds first and then Councillor Long?
Yeah, there's, thank you, that may be a small point. 6.18. I don't know whether Councillor Morgan is best placed to just explain that one. Can you just explain a little bit more in detail what we're talking about there? We're talking about removing a crossing that exists, not putting a crossing in that doesn't exist. I'm not quite sure what the situation is.
Councillor Dove, 6.18.
6.18, page 186.
Thank you.
Not a big point.
Oh, sorry, I almost lost my bearings there. 6.1, thank you. Yeah, it's okay, I think there's so many items on there, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not doing it to catch you out, it's
No,
I'm well aware of the road.
Yes, actually I'd refer to which officer's best to refer to us here. Thank you, sir.
Chairman, this money was set aside quite some time ago now. It's amazing how time flies. When the University Technical College planning application was going through the system, it was identified as a consultation requirement from NCC into capacity as highway authority that a new crossing should be provided at Eastern Way. To save having to pay out money, create a section 106 and then ultimately have it brought back to provide the crossing, it was agreed that this council should hold on to something that was going to contribute to the 106 to the UTC project and apply it in due course to provide that crossing. In the intervening period, various things have held that up, but now the UTC obviously is no more. That building has been taken over by Parker and buildings on the Parker site have been demolished, so there's actually no net increase in demand to use that crossing. That being the case, there is really no justification for providing the crossing at this time, not so there shouldn't be one ultimately, and therefore the budget is proposed to be deleted.
Can I just come back on that? You said on Eastern Way?
Yes.
Right, because I would say that the reason the cross is no longer needed is you've still got an underpass, which by the way, Councillor Allgate, is flooded. today. You may want to speak to your county colleagues on that. But no, my concern was Ashby Road is a busy road. You've got the zebra crossing towards the bottom, which was newly installed for the UTC. If that is not under threat, that's absolutely fine, because that road is very busy, and parkers moving into the UTC means that site is much more busy than it was when it was the UTC. So I'm quite happy with that.
Alan, we'll take that. Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, another thing on the, it's on page 187, 6.23, it's the Reach for Health one again, just about, it's got the slippage for the building works. And I don't know if I remember correctly, but was there also going to be some money released for the running track at the same sort of time?
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to refer on this one. In terms of it being a slippage, I mean, that's really simply a technical thing about when we're going to spend money. And from my knowledge, nothing else has changed.
Yes. If I could just comment on the grants. Yes, the grants still exist. Yes, it will be for the running track and the other things that we agreed with the Sports Association.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ritchie.
Chair, we might have reached the stage where we're talking about the niggling little details, but I just did want to say, paragraph 6.8 on 185, I put things in Clinton in which people there are absolutely delighted that the council has delivered the cycle track. They look forward to using it next May. The problem is that at the moment it is so dark at the times that they are going to even coming back from school that they are not going to come along a dark track through Woodston Dales. A couple of years ago, I raised the possibility that perhaps we should have a couple of extra lights anyway along that track so that people could actually use it and use it reasonably safely. It's awful good news to see that there is 31,000 that is still there in the pot. I'm sure that would be enough to put in the lights that this project actually requires.
Chairman, if I may, let's clarify with Councillor Ritchie. Are you suggesting lighting the new track and path steps up the embankment and then the path that runs through the public open
There are
space?
two sections from the top of the embankment to the there's already a track, a tarred cycleway that goes across to the I can't remember, there's from Rockingham Road or something that crosses over into the industrial estate where there is a light. There is a light there, but there is no light between there and the cycle track. Going the other direction, you have got, don't think there's light before you get to a belt of trees. The residents are very concerned that the track that they should follow the line of the track, which goes some distance through the belt of trees. Otherwise, they will take the shortest cut and simply come out and go across the football field, leaving bicycle tracks in the football field.
Chairman, if I may, I think I would suggest that Councillor Ritchie and I discuss this outside the meeting so I can probably understand what he's describing.
Thank you. Sorry, was it Councillor Andrews? Did you put your hand up again?
Well, it was just a point on lighting, because it's how you see it as safety. Because if you're in the middle of the woods and it's lit, it's still an unsafe area. But if it's lit, it makes you perceive that it is safe when really it isn't. Sometimes when it's left dark, you wouldn't go through it because it's not a very safe place to go anyway.
I think the reality is we're talking about the fear of crime. The reality is there's probably never been an attack there ever in the last 30 years, but we have the perception of fear of crime, so I accept that. And the lights don't necessarily, but what it does, it makes you feel safer sometimes. Councillor.
Just very quickly on that point, this did come up at the planning committee 2 or 3 years back, and I think it was Sergeant Debs who was at the committee at that time, and raised the point that exactly as when you said, that if you light that path, then you give people the impression that it's safe. And he referred to it as the Black Pass. which is a name that I've never heard before. But he was very strongly opposed to it in that past. So it would be interesting if it does come up in the discussions that take into account.
Thank you, Councillor James. Maria, just to clarify.
Yeah, I think the policy for cycle lanes, cycle routes is that they're lit. The crime designer doesn't want anywhere to be lit that isn't overlooked by housing. So there was a tension between two different policies, which is what was discussed at committee some years ago.
Yes. Sorry, you want to say something?
Chair, I don't know if, I was going to say, before the questions are over, we had quite a few questions, question 6. I kind of feel we're discussing lights now rather than...
Okay,
but I'm very happy not to discuss them.
No, I think Councillor Morgan, we're taking that out. Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, good. But I simply wanted to say it's an extensive programme. Like we said, the main risk, actually one of the biggest risks in there is the structural change orders, but actually, notwithstanding that, the officers are doing a significant amount of work, and we can see it all around us, and I'd like to wrap it up if that's okay, Chair.
No, not really, because I was going to ask something.
That's what I feared, Chair.
Yeah, no. Do you know this reserve that we're going to have in 21-22 of 27 million? Presumably, that reserve will be then passed on to the new unitaries. Is that correct? Right, so, okay,
I think, Chair, naturally that all of the monies would go together, wouldn't they?
Yeah, no, I was just making sure I was reading it correctly, that there was nothing going to happen that would thwart that. But if we carry on the projection here, at 21-22, that 27 million in reserves would be used for the benefit of the people in the new unitary.
Yes, basically. I mean, the fact of the matter is, and this is why I make the point, all of the money we have in our pot in the district council, of course, it's where it's allocated, is we need to keep it safe, because once we do go into that new unitary, we know it's going to be a challenging situation, and we still have to be investing and cautious about the future, because the taxpayers don't trust.
No, I understand. No, this is just for my giving me
in terms of your clarity, you've done it.
Okay. Now you can close.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. Can we go to the vote?
Daventry to the vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, colleagues, if we'd like to vote on the recommendations for the capital revenue budget and medium-term financial plan, those in agreement? Great. Thank you. I take it there are no abstentions and there are no objections. Thank you very much. That is unanimous. I think we now will ask members of the public to leave, who is non-existent, but more importantly, we want to turn off. Yeah, I knew I was just checking to see what you were Thank you, we're so efficient, we've done the key papers. Any urgent business? None from me. Thank you.
Point of information, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
There are 7 sites on the Brownfield Bridge.
Personal explanation, Chairman, I've also just downloaded